Hello world, hope y'all living well. Coming on today just to talk about my backstory a little bit and what's brought me here and what my mission is. Basically, what happened is 2-3 years ago, I was out weed whipping, taking care of housework, and I had an epiphany. And basically that epiphany was that I can do better. I know that I was doing better than what I came from substantially, but it just wasn't good enough. I wasn't being the best husband that I could be. I wasn't being the best parent that I could be. Again, like I said, doing way better than what I come from, but it wasn't enough. And I just felt that it was time to go deeper. So I chose to go to therapy, and basically, I knew with making that choice that could have ramifications and lead to a place that I wasn't sure of, and but here I am, and I feel it's time to share my story and just want to add value, just want to help the collective. I see a collective suffering throughout the world, and we all know what's going on right now. But at the same time, all you can really do that you can for sure take a hold of is going within and going deeper. And you can't control others, but you can control yourself, and that's where it all begins. Everything is within us. Abundance, joy, love, yes, sadness, anger, all of the other things as well too, which is all normal emotions. And that's what we need to learn. A lot of this stuff that I want to talk about is stuff that we should be being taught in school, but instead, I won't go too far into my opinion on that, but it's not enough real world stuff. I went to school and I can speak on it, and there's not enough general life substance or any life substance. So through my learnings, I just want to give back. I want to help teach. I didn't learn how to be a good man. Not even saying nothing on my father. I had a father in my life. I unfortunately had to create separation because it was to my detriment after trying and trying. But nonetheless, how are you supposed to be a good man if you're not taught how to be one? How are you supposed to be a good father if you're not, taught and shown the way? How are you supposed to be a good husband, a good partner? These things don't just happen on their own. It's our job to grow up and learn these things and mature. What I see a lot of is a lot of adult bodies, but just because we grew up, that doesn't mean that our emotional quotient rose, or we matured intellectually and emotionally. And that's important. That's just part of growing up. It's very important. It's important to me, and that's what I'm here for, just to spread my knowledge, add value, share my learning, share my trials and tribulations, and just help uplift you guys, help you be your best self. That's my biggest mission. I want to be my best self, so I feel a service to help others, and I want to help people that want to help themselves. I want to help you guys. That's why I made this channel. That's why I'm doing this, stepping outside my comfort zone. I'm here to stay. I don't plan to go anywhere. It's just going to keep building. We're never perfect. We're always a work in progress. We should be growing, changing all the time, constantly. If you're staying stuck, then you're just that. You're stuck. We should be moving forward. However that looks, it's going to look different from person to person. But yeah, should always be growing and changing. That's what I'm here for, and that's what I want to help encourage, support and inspire as well, and motivate. Um, so with that being said, when I chose to go to therapy, unfortunately, the chain reaction that occurred was I lost my mom, my dad, and my wife. All three of my closest people, all in like one swoop. It was a lot. It brought me into the dark night of the soul for me, which has a lot to do with an ego death as well. They are technically two different things, but closely related and involved as well. But it was no joke, and I thankfully had the capacity and ability at that time to want to go within. It was time, I guess, and so I went within and I went to therapy. I took accountability. I took the time to take a hard look at myself and really just reflect, and I don't know why, but for some reason reflection was just I just felt like it was needed, because I mean it's an essential ingredient to growing and changing. But nonetheless, I took full accountability, and there was mistakes that I made in every part of my life. Again, being a father, being a husband, I basically couldn't show up right. I had a bunch of toxic behavior that I had to learn about, but I had to be curious about that. What is toxic behavior? What is gaslighting? What is, manipulation, and how does that look, and basically I didn't want those to be traits of myself. So I taught myself what all of those toxic traits meant, and that way I could learn how to fix them and just be aware of how not to do it, how to be better. And it's been great, honestly. I'm not perfect, never will be, always will be growing and changing myself. We're always a work in progress, really. Um, Even with the work that I have done, sometimes it's easy to feel like, you haven't got anywhere, or you're going back to where you started. But healing that is not linear. You're going to have your ups and downs, and good days, bad weeks, bad years even, we could stretch to say. But at the same time, you don't want to be miserable in the meantime. We have a life to live, and you have to be present. And because that's what it is a present. That's simply what it is. The past is gone. You can't change or do anything about it, and the future hasn't came yet. So the most important thing is the present, day by day. um and it's important to live in the moment, and just be present, be aware of what you're doing, your behavior, and how it affects others, you know um, because it's not to say that everybody else's emotions are your problem, because ultimately they're not. We have to keep our own energy and not give energy away, because that's what the earth and all of the connection is energy, you know and you have to want better for yourself, to get the best out of your life. you know Not everybody chooses that, but if it matters to you, then this is a channel to visit, because all that I'm going to share and talk about is just positive stuff. Mostly, like I said, being a good dad, father, being a good man in general, and being a good husband or partner. That's going to be my main, topics that I'll be talking about. But, I have since brought a lot back together. Um, I don't live in the same household as my wife, but we are still married and have made amazing headway. I'm grateful for her. Words can't explain. She mattered. My kids mattered enough. I mattered enough. That's the most important thing too, is I mattered enough, because it all starts with you. You know, you can only show up for others as deeply as you've met yourself. You can only meet others as deeply as you've met yourself. If you haven't met the sadness, for example, in yourself, how are you supposed to show up for somebody else's sadness? You know, you can try, but chances are you're not going to be doing it in the right way. And again, yes, you can, and you can pull it off, but are you doing it the most efficiently and in a healthy way? I mean, unless you've put work into that or had that modeled to you, which I sure didn't in my childhood at all. It doesn't just happen. It's part of growing up. It's part of putting the work in to grow your emotional quotient, EQ. Just because, again, we've grown up, that doesn't mean that we are grown. You know, there's a bunch of adult children running around out there in the world, and you can see it in their behavior, a bunch of just selfish, immature behavior, and it's too bad, you know, but it's never too late to change that stuff or work on those things. And, you know, start today. I mean, you know, look at yourself and you can feel it. You can feel it in your soul. You know, again, if it matters to you, the work is worth it. You know, you have to put in work. Therapy was good, and at the same time, I can sit here and say that there's a part of it long term that's a scam, and they're just farming people too. Therapy can help you. I liked how one of the YouTubers that I learned a lot from had put it this way, and he said, you know, it's a good way to get you from the negatives back to zero and help diagnose. Of course, I'm not, you know, completely shutting down therapy or trying to talk shit about it at all, because it has its place. But at the same time, you know, if you're working with somebody for 10, 15 years doing therapy, and it's, oh yeah, we've got all this work done and made all this progress. Okay, well, you know, actually you're just paying for a best friend and somebody to listen, when really, with the right work, we can show up for ourselves in that way. You don't need anybody to validate yourself besides yourself. But you have to learn how to do it in the right way. This isn't stuff that we learn in school. This isn't things that we just know. You know, it takes work, and it takes caring about it and then doing something about it. Yeah, it's a great thing though, you know, to put work into yourself and to see the glimmers, you know, and glimmers are basically moments where, you know, you're like, well, I would have done this way in the past, but now I'm doing it, you know, in the right way or a more healthy way. Ultimately, that's what a glimmer is. You know, it's a great thing. We want to see glimmers. You feel it, you know, you're like, oh, my old self would have done this, and now I'm doing this. And it's hard not to be proud of yourself for that. It feels great. It feels good. You know, that's what it's all about. That's what I'm here for, to be better every day. Not perfect, and, you know, still human. Have all of the emotions. Just because you can show up for yourself better too, it doesn't mean that those things go away. You know, you still, for me, my biggest things were anger and anxiety. And, you know, I thought it was one of those type of deals where it was just like, oh, you know, I got to get rid of the anger, or I can't have that, because it was causing a lot of problems in my life. You know, honestly, God, I think my wife, kids, and dogs were afraid of me. But that all came from modeled behavior from my childhood. We have blueprints that basically we start our life with from our childhood, and everything that happened in it, and the modeling, the behavior that was modeled, we take that on, and then we live that out, basically, essentially bleeding on to others, everybody around us. And I'm so not proud of that, but I can sit here right now and say that I mean, you hear me acknowledging that, you know, and the accountability right there is just huge. I love accountability. It's tough. It took going through the dark night of the soul and my ego death, which with that being said, you can have multiple dark nights of the soul and ego deaths. Once that happened, it doesn't mean your ego's gone. It's still there. It'll always be there. But how I like to look at it and how I've explained it is, kind of that figurative thing where, you have a good angel on one side of your shoulder and a bad angel or the little devil on the other side. Well, the good angel is your soul, because there's mind, body, soul. And the bad one is your ego, or the little devil. And a lot of times the ego will win out. But you have to gain control of that and feel when that's happening, to not give into it. Basically there's a difference between thoughts and thinking. Thoughts just come to us. The thinking is what we do after the thought comes. And a lot of times the thinking is our ego, so when you're just going from the soul and just feeling it, being in that flow state, or as psychologists put it in technical terms, optimal, optimal experience is what, AKA flow state. That is one of the special places to be, because you think about it, like sports players and everything, they're not necessarily thinking hard about what they're doing. They're just doing it. That's a prime example of flow state. They just flowing, and that's where the best work for us comes from, is just being, again, present in the moment and flowing. That's a big part of this morning why I popped up and was like, it's time to, I'm feeling the flow. Let's do this. I got a lot to say. I have a lot to say with what I've been through. And I just want to help. I know that it's relatable. I know that I'm not the only one. I know that there's many others that have been through narcissistic abuse and betrayal and the different things that I'm talking about, And unfortunately, the narcissistic abuse that I sustained I took it for over 30 years. I just turned 37 not too long ago, and basically it's been a couple years since I kind of fully cut off my father after trying and trying, which was its own heartache, so much pain. One of the hardest things, I love him from afar. I don't hate my dad. That's not what I'm saying. I'm thankful for everything that he did, because the biggest thing is our parents, they were handed these generational things, because we're even handed our nervous system down from our mother. We come into this world with, so if your mom was anxious or went through abuse while you were pregnant, that's setting you up for a lot of healing that needs to be done. That's just the bottom line. But they didn't ask for it. It's not completely their fault. But the thing that I've learned is, once you're an adult and once you grow up, it is our job to learn to do better. So it may not have been their fault, and they may have had the best intentions, which I know mine did, and I know my parents love me. But when you're dealing with certain treatment, you just get to a point where basically, it was like, well, what changed? What changed is I learned to love myself. And when you love yourself truly, you have to ask yourself tough questions, such as, even though it's my parents, if they're treating you like shit, is that worth it to keep them in your life? Is that worth it to do it to yourself? Think about if you was telling somebody that you cared about, and you seen them being abused or treated like shit, you would be like, you don't have to take that, chances are, if but you don't. It's our job to protect our peace, and personally, I take that very seriously. We can't not. It's our life, and this is the one conscious life that I know I'm living, and I want to make the best of it and be the happiest. And being in that constant cycle of dysfunction, which was my whole childhood, I was in the middle of my grandparents fighting with my dad and parents, and seeing my grandparents treat my mom horribly. And it was just chaos and just dysfunction. And I don't wonder why, I had the problems that I have, but ultimately it was up to me to do better. Like I say again, I had plenty of toxic behavior that I didn't even realize. And I had narcissistic traits because my dad, as I have found through learnings, I had to learn about it to understand it, to help me heal, honestly. And unfortunately my dad falls on the end of grandiose narcissism, and that's tough. That's tough. I went through a lot of mental and physical abuse, psychological stuff that he didn't even realize that he was doing it. So again, I have space for that, but ultimately it came down to I won't tolerate being treated like shit anymore. And I'm sure there's plenty of you that can relate to that. We don't have to. We don't have to. That's people pleasing, and ultimately people pleasing is manipulation. Because if you're people pleasing, I can give you an example, and you're doing something because you don't, I don't want to do this because I don't want them to feel a certain way. Well, that right there is manipulation, how I just explained it. So, that's toxic behavior, and it's important to not people please and bring all your own energy back to yourself and start making decisions that feel in alignment with how you really feel. If you don't want to go out with your friends and go to the club or whatever, go do that, say no. Chances are a lot of times if you go and do that, I have found that something random could happen where you're just like, see, like I knew it, if I would have just stayed home, and at the same time you got to get out and do those things as well. But point being, one of the biggest things that I learned is to say no, and I would just do things just because, I didn't want them to look at me a certain way or whatever, but that wasn't authentic. That wasn't pure. It was people pleasing, also known as manipulation, and so it's important just to be our true self and make decisions according to how we really feel, because then that just leads you in the right direction and you end up being the most happy from those decisions. And so yeah, I went to therapy for almost 2 years. 3/4 of it was once a week. I did the math, and that was upwards of $10,000. So it's a shame that if you have a rough childhood, which most all of us do. I mean, even the silver spoon childhoods, you could say, have their own issues. It's just the way it is. But it's unfortunate that we have to, basically grow up and kind of find out these things that weren't ideal. But then it's important to make the right choices and do the right thing to bring it around and mature, basically grow up, make your way into adulthood, basically, and so I'm just here to be vulnerable, and authentic, and be my best self. I want to be held accountable too. I will always be learning. I'm not perfect, never will be, don't have any desire to be, but I truly just want to help, like I said, give back from my learnings, my trials and tribulations, because being a good person overall just brings you so much. It's a great thing, and that's what I'm here for, again, like I've said. And there's a lot, that I have to give, and I just want to add value to your life, you know. Um, Hope to be getting certified in life coaching here soon as well too. But regardless, I'm gonna share my story. I feel like it's a calling for me, and you know, I just love to help people. You have to show up for yourself, and you can't really fully help others until you've helped yourself though. And over the last couple of years, few years, really going on like 3 years now, it's just been just nonstop books read, out countless hours of YouTube videos. Everything that you want to know, I hate to say, is on YouTube. All of the healing, there's different courses that you can get. There's a lot of free content, such as what I'm putting out right now. You know, and soak it up, learn, be open, be willing to reflect, be willing to be accountable, you know. With those things, you know, one of the biggest things was just being able to say I'm sorry, you know, a full I'm sorry. You know, there was a lot of that had to come with that kind of awakening, you could say, and start down the healing journey. You know, I took time to apologize to my kids. I took a lot of time to apologize to them, truly, and also to my wife, you know, my spouse, and just, you know, show her that I realized a lot of the things that I did wrong, and truly I am sorry from the bottom of my heart, you know. And and then, you know, you have to have the action to follow behind it, you know, which again, we're not going to be perfect, you know, still going to make mistakes. But I think one of the biggest things, with that being said, is when you make those mistakes, just own it. Just apologize as soon as possible. You know, maybe not, you know, if you just had an argument or whatever, you know, maybe not just right away, but, you know, you feel when it's right, you know, the next day, ideally as soon as possible, you know, that way it doesn't drag on, and you take care of it. You know, a lot of times, I mean, I tell my kids, I'm like, if I hurt your guys' feelings, if I do something to hurt your feelings, please tell me. But you also have to have the safety created for that, which has taken me a lot of time to build back, honestly, but it's there fully. You know, my boys trust me. I have two beautiful boys, and they're amazing. They are a product of me, and they are the proof in the pudding of my work, basically. I mean, and that's the biggest thing, you know. I want to leave the world better than I found it, you know, and the best way to do that is by raising two awesome boys, which I seem to be somehow pulling off. You know, I care about it. So, you know, and as far as your partner goes, your spouse, have been married, was fully together for about 13 years. You know, we've been separated for a while now, but have really brought things back together where there's intimacy and connection and all of the things that, you know, should make a healthy marriage. And I'm beyond proud of that, you know. And you know, as far as your spouse goes, you have to also create the safety for certain tough conversations there to be had, you know. There's a lot that I did that I acknowledged without even it having to be talked about, just because I thought back on it all and wanted to truly apologize for a lot of stuff that I did wrong. But at the same time, once you apologize for it, those things don't necessarily just completely go away. You know, you may have issues where your spouse brings up pain, and really the best thing and only thing for you to do is just meet them there and take the accountability, you know, come down to their level and be in that space with them and apologize and mean it. You know, don't be defensive and create disconnection, because that's all that does. When and I know, again, from experience with that, I used to just be defensive and, oh well, this and that, and just get defensive, and that's all just work, internal work that you need to show up for yourself for, because once you do that, you know, and you mature, you find out that you don't have to do that. That's not an ideal way of communicating, you know. um, that's not true accountability. You know, if you're just being defensive and blame shifting or deflecting, you know, it turns into reactive abuse, basically, you know, where they are trying to express pain or hurt to you, you know, and you're flipping it on them, basically, you know. And you know, can go more into that at a later, you know, video. But yeah, it's important for me to be my best self and do all of these things that I've been talking about. And I want to help you guys too. You know, I'm going to continue to put this content out and just talk on a whole bunch of different things and tips and tricks that I've learned. Nervous system stuff, because that's a big thing, you know, in your bandwidth with the anger and the anxiety, those being my biggest things. You have to learn about your nervous system, you know, and the vagus nerve that runs basically all the way through your body. You know, and there's different ways that you can stimulate the vagus nerve, and it creates stress relief, and it's very good stuff. You know, you can work with your nervous system, heal your nervous system, and create a bigger bandwidth that allows you to basically have bigger capacity to deal with activating and or triggering events that happen, because there's a difference between being activated and being triggered as well. And so that's a little bit of my backstory that's important for me to share, just because, you know, humility is big for me, you know. And you know, we are all one. We're all one with nature as well too. You know, I am huge on hunting and fishing and just live in the outdoors. I feel like I'm where I'm supposed to be. My soul is supposed to be when I'm in the outdoors. It's not even about getting anything, you know, necessarily if I'm hunting or fishing. It's just about being out there. Because ultimately that's where we're supposed to be, not just living this fast-paced life where, you know, you barely even have time to rest. It's like, it's important to slow down and just be present, like I said, and enjoy the moment. Be grateful to be here. And yeah, that's about all that I got for you guys today. There's gonna be a lot to come. Much love and namaste.